Welcome to another episode of the Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. Today I'm joined by Greg Henry from Ivanti. We're going to be talking about making the warehouse worker more efficient with technology. A little background on Greg. I've known Greg for a number of years. He's now the VP of Partner Sales at Ivanti's Wavelength division, which focuses on supply chain management solutions. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Okay, perfect. So it is a mouthful.
Yes.
Fun fact about Greg, I think Greg actually left technology. He'd been in technology for 20, 30 years. I think he left technology and went and worked in the automotive industry. I don't know if you can give the quick summary of what happened there, or maybe tell us more about what you learned in that space.
Certainly. So I've been a gearhead my whole life. Owned, geez, probably 25 different cars, lots of muscle cars. So went through a Porsche phase for a while. And a couple of years ago, I got the opportunity to join Steve Saleen with Saleen Automotive, that makes high performance Mustangs and trucks, which was like my dream, right? It's like I get to do my hobby. I was like, I can't pass this up. So I left the industry. Fortunately, my timing was poor. COVID just kicked off. Ford shut down their manufacturing plant, so we had no vehicles to build for quite a period of time. Just due to cash flow restraints at the time, I decided, you know what, it should be a hobby, and I'm back in the industry.
25 cars. That's impressive. I don't know if my wife would let me have 25 cars.
I'm only allowed one at a time. So
That's I had a friend who he has I don't know if his wife doesn't listen to this, but he actually bought a warehouse and was keeping cars there, and she didn't know about it.
oh my
So,
gosh.
anyways, pro tip for those out there trying to hide cars from your wives.
Yes.
Um, so let's I guess before we hop into the topic, can you tell me a little bit more about the Ivanti Wavelength division, what you guys focus on, the
Yeah.
products you guys provide or solutions you guys provide?
Yeah, no, the Wavelength has been around for 30 years. We got our start doing telnet emulation on mobile devices. Still do that today. It's still our number one selling product is a telnet emulator. But we've significantly advanced from that, right? So we've got a telnet browser that connects to just about any warehouse system. We've got a web browser. They fall under the Velocity name, and they're really about improving the mobile worker experience because they're not just a browser, right? They're an industrial browser, meaning we can lock them down. We can keep the worker focused on the worker's task, and at the same time, actually modify those screens to improve that worker experience. And we'll talk more about that later. And then the second half is we're into the MDM space. We've got a new product, Neurons for MDM. Avalanche was our previous product, came out 20 years ago. We actually started the MDM space. And now we've rolled into a full cloud-based product that supports not only the rugged devices, but also will handle your enterprise BYOD kinds of devices. So the industry's evolved, and we've evolved to you got a single platform that does everything now.
Yeah, long history there, and I know just a plug for BlueFletch. We've done a lot of work with Greg and the team over at Ivanti
Oh
for the
yes,
last couple of years on integrating our single sign-on into the both the terminal emulation side and the browser side. So definitely a lot of investments your team has made around making things more efficient for employees,
yeah.
which is a great segue into the first question I had for you, which was I think in the last, and this is there's a ton of press around it in 2020 through 2022. There was the quote unquote great resignation, which was a lot of people left. There's a huge amount of turnover in a lot of companies. And I feel like a lot of that was, especially in the warehouse or supply chain side, the delivery drivers, things like that. Is that still happening? Is that something that you're still seeing out there? Your customers still seeing a lot of turnover in the warehouse?
Absolutely. It's I think it's part of a reflection of COVID and people being let go. It's part of this gig worker economy now. You don't sign up for a company for 20 years anymore. You work when you want to. And within the warehouse community, you work for any one of the big 3PLs. There's a whole city of warehouses right beside each other, right? So you can literally go to 3PL 1 or A on Monday and decide I don't like my boss, I don't like the technology, I don't like whatever, and go to the warehouse next door the next day and get hired. So there's been a lot of shift there. Um, and not only is it difficult for the employers as far as just keeping track of people and keeping it incentivized, but the training costs, onboarding new employees to every new system is really a significant investment. And so they're talking to us about how can we improve our technology, simplify our technology, and really onboard these new folks quicker, and then give them tools that they enjoy using so that they'll stay with us and not go to the warehouse next door.
Yeah, and there's a great article that Ivanti did. I think it was last, I remember the right, last fall, but it was I think the numbers they cited, they did a study amongst warehouse workers, and it was 64% cited that technology impacted morale. I'm assuming it's negatively impacted
Yes.
morale, but only 20% of executives budgeted towards improving the digital experience. What do you think is causing that gap? With everybody saying that employee retention is such a big thing and training is expensive, why is there still I guess a clear gap between what executives are investing in and what employees want?
I think a lot of it comes down to the idea that if I want to improve my warehouse system, I have to invest in my back end. I apologize for that. I have to invest in back end infrastructure, meaning probably a new warehouse management system, right? I got to replace the golden cow, right? The warehouse management system, their WMS is runs the company, is the most important piece of the process. And in many cases, it's 5, 10, 15 years old, but it does the job. And to replace that is a significant investment in not only money, but time. And the IT groups are, nobody can touch the system. So everything, any automation you want to do has to be without touching it. And that puts you in a conundrum, right? I don't got millions of dollars to invest in it. And at the same time, I can't easily connect new things to it. So it makes management resident to go after big investments. But that's not really the case. And that's what Velocity, our telnet and web client's all about, is connecting, making those operational improvements on the client side and fooling it in the back end into thinking it's talking to the same old client, right? So we do a lot of optimization work within the telnet client and the web client to change the workflow for the worker, but behind the scenes, we're emulating exactly the same steps that the WMS wants to see. And not a lot of people know that that's even possible.
Yeah, so it's a modern interface it's running on the device, and then below that is still the 35-year-old
Yes.
I series or AS400 that's in the back, somebody's closet in the back room, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
it's interesting because Velocity has been out there so long. It is the number one selling emulator in the world. Yet nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, there's a small fraction of people that are leveraging the advanced capabilities it has. And that's the message that we're really driving to our partner community this year is, hey, we've got this, we've got an ability to significantly improve that mobile worker experience, reduce their training costs, improve their accuracy and productivity without making a tremendous investment in infrastructure.
and for that, like that investment gap, like no swag here, like per screen, if somebody wants to modernize and put like a good UI on top of a legacy green screen, like what is it, like a per screen cost? Does it end up to is like $2,000 $3,000 per screen to modernize it?
Probably not even that much. But yeah, these projects can be 15 to $100,000, right? Depending on how many screens and how many processes you're doing. Are you doing every single, doing picking and put away and cycle count, or are you just really focused on those applications? If you start small, focus on the applications that have the most movement and have the most unnecessary steps involved, you can get big leaps in productivity and ROI. I'll give you an example. We've got one customer that did this themselves. They were a Velocity user. We told them about the capabilities. They were able to remove 24 steps in their process and improve no, I'm sorry, remove 14 steps in their process and improve their productivity by 24%.
Wow, that's per employee every day. So effectively getting 2 free hours a day, right?
Yeah, no, it's impressive, impressive stuff, and it all comes back to these legacy WMSs, right? We're built for a big monitor. They were built for somebody at a keyboard that had paper documents, and those workflows don't necessarily translate to the mobile guy with a device picking and putting stuff away on a shelf, right? And so there's lots of steps you can take out of that, or even use the intelligence in the device to screen scrape one piece of information and place it into the next field rather than having the user have to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then with that, like, where does voice fit into that? I know like voice picking is sort of a thing that's been around for a while. I feel like it's starting to get better with AI, but like, where does voice picking fit into that modernization, that improving the experience for end users?
That is voice is one of those technologies that it has its niche place, right? We've got a voice add-on for Velocity. It allows you to voice enable any telnet or web application fairly easily. It's not a big lift, but where we find folks are really using it is still in that picking environment where you need hands free. Whether you're at a tire manufacturer and you're moving big tires and you need hands free, or if it's in small picking and you're reaching into bins and stuff where you don't want to be putting a device down necessarily, right? Or you need hazardous environments, you need this spatial awareness, and you don't want to be looking down at a screen. And it works really, really well there. With the Android devices, the processing power, the memory on these devices is so much better than it was, back in the Windows and even DOS days. The voice really does work very well, pretty much across the board. But picking is still kind of that anywhere where there's hands free, which is typically picking, is where we find it gets the biggest ROI.
Got it. So it's a targeted specific set of functionality you can
Yeah,
go after. But in general, like even the modernization is the part where you get the biggest lift, that 20,
yeah,
that 24% you mentioned.
yeah, and it's not necessarily. We used the word modernization for a lot of years, and it's kind of evolved into, in some circles, just make it look pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about being pretty. It's about optimizing that workflow. In some cases, you can optimize a telnet green screen without ever doing any GUI look and feel, right? It's just about getting rid of the unnecessary steps. And then the next level is maybe you add a button or two. A lot of these, devices, we leverage the function keys because they were hard keyboards back in the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no function 3 on a new touchscreen device. So how do popping up a keyboard doesn't make a lot of sense. So replacing that function with just a button icon that says next or back is more intuitive to a user than saying press function 3. And at the same time, is a more pleasing visual experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good segue into the next question I have. But there are so many ways that you can go and invest in technology. And I had a list. I think you and I had chatted through it. But things like the data, like cleaning up your data, moving to the cloud, security, robots, AI, RFID, inventory visibility. If you had to pick like the three key areas that people should be focusing on in 2023, what would those be, or what would those look like? Or four or five, whatever your
Yeah,
top list is.
I mean, it depends. There's lots of things to look at. Environmental considerations. I would say number one is optimizing the workflow, right? Whatever that means to your particular environment. In some cases, that just means reorganizing the order of the data, how the data is collected. In other aspects, it might be using heads-up display technology. If you've got harsh environments and you don't want and you truly need full hands-free, Velocity now powers heads-up display, so you can take that existing stuff, put it on, displayed in your eyeglass. We're doing things with Zebra and Fetch robots where we're actually calling robots to come and finish a picking process, for example. So we're not necessarily controlling the whole robot, but we are um, using the robot technology to augment the worker and remove the steps of having to take, I pick a bunch of stuff to a cart. Rather than me taking the cart back, I have a robot bring me a empty one and take back the full one so that I continue to do the valuable job of picking, not of carrying it, back and forth.
Yeah. What's
There,
your thoughts on maybe to dive into that, like the robotics piece? When you think about the maturation of that, is that it feels like it's still in its infancy. I know we've all seen the pictures of the Boston Dynamic robot where it's carrying a box and there's some guy hitting it with a hockey stick and it doesn't drop the box. Like, what is the what is your thought on, will a robot ever replace a worker, or is it just going to be this worker assist, like making the worker's life better by getting rid of the boring stuff?
I think in my lifetime, it'll be augmenting the worker, getting rid of the heavy lifting, getting rid of the moving products from one area to the other. The idea of a humanoid looking thing coming in and picking it, I in my view, very cool futuristic ideas, but can be solved today through just automated machines, right? We do, like drug companies today load up a vending machine and it will automatically dispense product onto a conveyor belt. So a lot of that's been solved. So I don't see the robot really replacing people, but more just getting rid of the labor associated and the time associated with going from one station to another, that doesn't really need to be done by a person.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Transportation transporting stuff is probably the best role for them.
Got it. So you mentioned optimizing the workflow environments, the robotic assist augmentation. What else is on your list of technologies you think are key and starting to look at 2023?
We're really starting to look at IoT technologies, and again, in that same concept as a robot, being able to leverage. I'll give you an example of something we did recently. Was had a there's a shipping company. They would, collect all their stuff, put it on a pallet, shrink wrap it, roll it onto a truck, out of the way. When it get to the other end, the customer would say, there was something damaged with that shipment. Either there was a forklift hole in it or it fell over. And it would take them hours to go back and reconstruct how that pallet was built. And they had camera systems shining at every single dock door. So what we were able to do again with Velocity is, as we interjected into their existing workflow, scan the dock bay you're at, which is what they were doing, so they knew which truck it was on, scan the pallet, and they would roll the pallet onto the truck. What we did was added a little bit of code that said when you scan that pallet, turn on the camera system that was already there, film 20 seconds of that pallet being rolled into the truck. And now, because we knew what order it was on, when the customer would call and say, "Hey, I've got a complaint," they could literally send them an email clip of a video that says, "Here was that pallet being distributed onto the truck, and it was perfect when it left." So it happened sometime, between leaving our building and your facility, not our problem. So just being able to connect other technologies and activate them, if you will. We're doing the same thing with environmental sensors now. Being able to, rather than have the operator have to key in what the temperature of the freezer is, as an example, we can actually just walk into the freezer and grab that data from an IoT device. So I see us really starting to connect that mobile worker with auxiliary technologies that remove the data entry points that they were historically responsible for doing.
Yeah, I like that. You sort of just said, the Internet of Technologies. That is a much better phrase than Internet of Things. I think
Yes.
things is pretty ambiguous. I feel like
Yeah.
Internet of Technologies, taking all these various disparate technologies, whether it's cameras or sensors, and just having those be connected. I think that's a really good way to think about it. How do you get more value out of it?
Yeah.
Any other like key things you think people should start looking at this year?
We're starting to do a little bit in analytics. How are these devices really being used? Do you have enough devices in your population? Do you have too many devices? Folks, determining how many devices you start with in a warehouse or a store is always been historically kind of guess, right? And these technologies now are able to report on not just what happened from a data analytics perspective, but what's going on with the device and the user, who's using which devices, when are they logging in, when are they logging out, who dropped a device, right? The damaged devices, being able to report back to, hey, Bob seems to drop a lot of devices. Maybe Bob needs some training, kind of stuff, right? So lots of things to look at. But again, if going back to your original question, if it's where do you place your first bet, in my mind, it always comes back to really look at that workflow and figure out how you can optimize it to take as many of the steps and time associated with any given task out of it.
And I guess my last question on your top three or four for the data and the optimization, are you starting to see people actually looking at ML about how to optimize that? I know I've seen it on the marketing side and I've seen a lot of it like the content side. Are you seeing that in the warehouse at all, using like AI and ML to actually optimize some of those tasks or even optimize the analytics you're getting?
Not significantly yet, right? It's out there as one of those, hey, this is where we need to be going, and it's kind of the new North Star, if you will. Um, but there's still a lot of, I would say there's still a lot of opportunity just in the day-to-day operations that we're not taking advantage of as much as we could.
The low hanging fruit. All right, so I'm gonna be super pragmatic here. I'm a manager, site manager for a facility that runs like a bunch of warehouses, or a director of operations. I have a limited amount of budget. If I have to pick one thing to go after or try to get a quick win, and I only have like a certain amount of budget to invest in, where do you start, or what do you start looking at?
For me, I mean, I hate to be a broken record, but for me, I would literally walk the floor with several of my warehouse associates and look at how they are, what the system is how the system is telling them what to do, and really deep dive into, is that the most efficient and practical way that it could be done? And
Yeah.
and going back to that, can you remove steps, and really take your blinders off, right? A lot of us came up through this space as whatever the WMS is the way it is. And with today's mobile technology, it doesn't have to be that way. And we have the ability to, as I stated, reorganize the workflow, reduce prompts that aren't necessary. Here's a really good example. If you look at just about every WMS you log into, if you are a picker, you have a series of menus you have to get through to even get to your picking process, right? You've got to pick inventory functions, then pick another level, and then finally you're on your fourth button press, you're at picking. Why don't we, if we know that those workers are going to do picking and put away, let's put those on the very first screen and they just press picking. And behind the scenes, we will fill in the screen so the host gets to where it needs to go, auto magically, if you will. But
Mhm.
that saves 10 seconds of a worker time, and if he's doing that 6, 7, 8 times a day, over 400 workers, it's real time that's being saved, and it's inexpensive to do. It's a couple days of professional services time. It's not a big spend, and it's a really quick ROI, and there's almost zero risk involved in it. It's just a really simple win for everybody.
Yeah, the get out there and walk the floor. That is probably
Yes.
one of the best pieces of advice I could think of, and I can't believe I didn't write that down somewhere already. But I just remember I had one situation where there's a company engaged us that we went and talked to the CIO, and we asked to do a warehouse visit, and he's like, why? Our processes are pretty good. We just want you guys to look at the apps. And I'm like, all right. So we went and walked the floor, and I went to one of the employees. I'm like, is there anything you want to improve in the process? He's like, no, the process is really good. We got it nailed down. And I'm like, well, describe your process. And they were doing, scanning items, and then they'd open the box, make sure they're correct, do an inspection, take pictures. And so he would scan it on his mobile device, had a physical camera with an SD card, would take pictures, walk over to a computer, put the SD card in, drag them over to a file, go into the WMS on the computer and add them. And I'm like, so is there anything in the process you think you'd want to improve? He's like, no, it's really good.
Right.
It was like your device, your Zebra mobile device already had a camera on it. And so we ended up helping them retool that. So they were using, got rid of, like, I want to say it was probably about 5 minutes per pick, but it's just, like you said, getting out there and walking the floor.
Yeah.
Things.
Yeah. I mean, just because it works, you get, it's like anything in life, right? If it works, you get used to it. And there's always better ways. There's always a better mousetrap. There's, there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. So I'm going to give you a quick summary here. I know we're coming up on time, but a couple of things Greg said, it's optimizing for the environment. So things like, just look at what's happening in the environment itself. Robotic assists, start looking at that, thinking about how to augment your workers, the robots. Internet of technology. I'm going to start using that phrase, not Internet of things. Look at the sensors you already have, the cameras. How do you join that data, bring that data together? And then analytics, start looking at analytics. How can you use the data coming off these devices to get better? And then my new all-time favorite, get out there and walk the floor.
Walk the floor.
I love that. That's great. Greg, I guess if people want to find out more about Wavelength and some of the tools and processes you mentioned, where would they come look for you, or what's your URL / site people go to?
Yeah, the website is Ivanti.com/wavelength. We've got a new Twitter handle. I don't even know what it is, unfortunately, but if you follow us on Twitter, I'm sure it's probably Wavelength. We're doing a lot of social media stuff now. We are starting in May going to be doing a road show across the country. So those dates haven't been formalized yet, but they'll be coming here soon. So look out for that. We'd love to meet you in person and show you what we're doing. And we're really tight with Zebra, Honeywell, Data Logic, all the hardware guys, so they all know where to find us too.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. So check out, search for Greg on Twitter, maybe.
Yes.
And then the road shows, to take a look at Ivanti.com/wavelength to find out more about those road shows this year, and definitely get out there and take a look at some of the newer technologies they're coming up with. And Greg, I just want to say thank you again for joining us.
Great.
And thanks to everybody who's listening for this episode of Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. If you have other topics or suggestions you think would be useful, shoot them our way at info@bluefletch.com. And thank you again.
Appreciate it.